Inside the bathroom, at night, rain falling against windows. Female voice shaking. Say something, please. Male voice hoarse panicked. If you had told me, I would have stopped. Female voice. I thought I could be brave. Silence. Water dripping. A phone vibrating on tile. Male voice breaking. I can't do this. Not like this. Door opens. Footsteps fade. Door slams. Narrator, low intimate. 3 hours ago, Nia Carter believed love could finally stop hurting. 3 hours later, she was sitting on her bathroom floor, staring at a missed call, and wondering if her body had just ended the best thing she'd ever known. But this didn't begin tonight. It began 3 months earlier, on a rainy street, with scattered pages, and a stranger who knelt in the rain. If you've ever felt like your past was sabotaging your future, stay with me. This story gets deeper than you think. And don't forget to like and subscribe, because what happens next will make you question everything you thought you knew about love. Nia Carter pressed her forehead against the cold bathroom tiles and tried to remember how to breathe. The rain hammered against the window like it was trying to break through, trying to reach her, trying to drown out the sound of her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. But nothing could drown out the memory of his voice, cracked, panicked, horrified, saying those 4 words that had shattered everything. Not like this. Her phone buzzed again on the tile beside her knee. She didn't look at it. Couldn't. Because if it was him, she didn't know what she'd say. And if it wasn't him, that would be worse. That would mean he was done. That would mean she'd been right all along. That this part of her, this one thing she'd held onto for 26 years, was exactly the kind of baggage that made men run. She'd thought tonight would be different. She'd thought if she just pushed through the fear, if she just acted like the kind of woman who knew what she wanted, he'd stay. He'd see her as enough, as whole, as worth the trouble. Instead, he'd looked at her like she was breaking, like she was broken. And then he'd left. Nia pulled her knees to her chest and let the tears come, hot and bitter, because the worst part wasn't that he'd left. The worst part was that she understood why. She'd lied to him. She'd lied to herself. And now she was sitting on a bathroom floor at 26 years old, wondering if she'd ever stop running from the one person she could never escape, herself. But this story didn't start tonight. It started 3 months ago, on a street in Haejeon district, when the rain came down just as hard and a stranger knelt beside her in the storm, gathering up pages of a romance novel she'd been too afraid to finish. It started when Seo Joon-ha looked at her with eyes that held their own kind of pain and said, "Why does love feel like war when it's supposed to feel like home?" It started when she thought maybe, just maybe, she'd found someone who could understand. The rain had come out of nowhere that day, the kind of sudden downpour that turned Lanara City's streets into rivers in minutes. Nia had been walking home from the International Academy where she taught English, her messenger bag slung over her shoulder, her mind 1,000 miles away in Atlanta where her grandmother's voice still echoed in her memory. "Baby, you can't keep running from yourself." She'd been running for 2 years now. Running from Evan. Running from the church that had told her purity was the only currency she had. Running from the look in his eyes when she'd finally broken off their engagement. Half relief, half rage, like she'd stolen something from him by keeping it. The manuscript in her bag was supposed to be her fresh start. A romance novel about gentle love. About 2 people who chose each other without conditions, without shame, without the weight of everyone else's expectations crushing them into shapes they didn't recognize. She'd been working on it for 18 months, and she still hadn't written the ending because she didn't know what a good ending looked like anymore. The rain hit like a wall, and Nia gasped, breaking into a run toward the nearest awning. Her bag swung wide, the zipper she'd forgotten to close giving way, and suddenly pages were flying. White rectangles spinning in the rain, landing in puddles, sticking to the wet pavement. No, 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 she dropped to her knees, scrambling to save them, but the ink was already bleeding, words dissolving into watercolor smears. "Here." The voice came from beside her, low and slightly out of breath. A man knelt in the rain, gathering pages with careful hands, stacking them even though they were soaked through. Nia looked up, rain streaming down her face, and saw him clearly for the first time. He was maybe 30, dressed in a charcoal suit that was definitely not meant for kneeling in puddles, his dark hair plastered to his forehead. But it was his eyes that caught her, dark and deep and carrying something heavy, something that made her think he knew what it was like to lose things in the rain. You don't have to, she started. It's already ruined, he said, nodding at his suit. Might as well make it worth something. They gathered the pages in silence, moving in tandem down the street like they'd done this before. When they'd collected what they could, maybe half the chapter, maybe less, he stood and offered her his hand. His grip was warm despite the rain. Seo Joon-ha, he said. Nia Carter. He looked down at the soggy stack in his hands, and something shifted in his expression. One page sat on top, the words still barely legible. Why does love feel like war when it's supposed to feel like home? He read it aloud, slowly, like he was tasting each word. When he looked up at her, there was recognition in his eyes. Not of her, but of the question itself. Like he'd been asking it too. You wrote this? Nia nodded, suddenly self-conscious, suddenly aware of how she must look. Soaked, mascara probably running, clutching a pile of ruined manuscript pages like they were the only thing keeping her tethered to the ground. She tried to laugh it off. It's not finished. I don't know how it ends yet. Maybe that's the point, Joon-ha said quietly. Then, as if catching himself, he shook his head. I'm sorry. That was strange. He gestured helplessly at the pages. This line. It hit something. The rain was slowing now, turning from downpour to steady drizzle. Around them, the street was coming back to life. People emerging from awnings. Umbrellas blooming like flowers. Let me buy you coffee, Joon-ha said suddenly. To apologize. For what? For not having an umbrella to offer you. For reading your work without permission. He paused, and something vulnerable flickered across his face. For relating to it more than I probably should. Nia should have said no. Should have thanked him politely and gone home to her apartment to cry over her ruined pages, and the grandmother she missed, and the life she'd left behind in Atlanta. But there was something in his voice, something in the way he held her words like they mattered, that made her say yes instead. They found a small cafe tucked between a bookstore and a flower shop, the kind of place with warm lighting and mismatched chairs and windows that fogged up from the heat inside. Joon-ha ordered for both of them, Americanos, no sugar, and they sat by the window watching the rain trace patterns down the glass. So, he said, wrapping his hands around his cup. A romance novel about love that doesn't hurt. Is that what you're writing? Trying to write, Nia corrected. It's harder than it sounds. Because you don't believe in it? The question was too direct, too honest for a first conversation with a stranger. But somehow it didn't feel intrusive. It felt like he genuinely wanted to know. Because I want to believe in it, Nia said carefully. But I don't know if I've ever seen it. Not up close. Joon-ha nodded slowly, his eyes on his coffee. Me neither. They sat in silence for a moment, the kind of silence that felt full rather than empty. Around them, the cafe hummed with quiet conversation, the hiss of the espresso machine, the clink of cups on saucers. What do you do? Nia asked, breaking the spell. When you're not rescuing manuscripts from the rain? I work in hospitality, he said, which Nia would later learn was a massive understatement. Seo Joon-ha was the heir to the Luminaria Hotel Group, one of the largest luxury chains in Asia. But that afternoon, he was just a man in a ruined suit who looked at her like she'd said something worth listening to. What about you? I teach English at the International Academy in Gangnam. American literature, creative writing, that kind of thing. So you came to Korea to teach? I came to Korea to start over, Nia said, surprising herself with the honesty. Teaching was just the excuse. Joon-ha's eyes met hers, and she saw understanding there. Not pity, not curiosity. Understanding. Like he knew exactly what it meant to need an excuse to run. What were you starting over from? Nia hesitated. This was the moment where she usually deflected, changed the subject, built the wall back up. But something about the rain and the coffee and the way he'd knelt in the puddles to save her words made her want to tell the truth. A fiancé who loved an idea more than he loved me, she said quietly. A church that made me feel like my body was the only valuable thing about me. A grandmother who died before I could prove to her that I was more than my mistakes. She looked down at her cup. Small stuff. Sounds heavy. Yeah. Nia managed a smile. What about you? What are you starting over from? Joon-ha was quiet for a long moment, his jaw working like he was trying to decide how much to say. Finally he spoke, his voice low. A family that sees me as a business asset. A life that was planned out before I was old enough to have an opinion. And he stopped, something dark crossing his face. And some things that happened a long time ago that I thought I'd moved past, but apparently haven't. The vulnerability in his voice made Nia's chest ache. She reached across the table, not quite touching his hand, but close enough that he could feel the intention. We're a mess, aren't we? She said softly. Joon-ha looked at her hand, then at her face, and something in his expression shifted. Warmed. Yeah, he said. But at least we're honest about it. They stayed at the cafe until the rain stopped completely, until the sun broke through the clouds and painted the wet streets gold. They talked about books and cities, and the weight of expectations. They talked about everything and nothing, the way people do when they're trying to decide if this feeling, this spark, this recognition, is worth the risk of hoping for something more. When they finally left, the sky was clearing, and the air smelled like rain and possibility. Can I see you again? Joon-ha asked, standing on the sidewalk outside the cafe, his hands in his pockets like he was trying to look casual but failing. Nia knew she should say no. Knew she should protect herself, keep her distance, not let another man get close enough to discover all the ways she was broken. But she was tired of running, tired of being afraid. And something about Joon-ha made her want to try. Yes, she said. I'd like that. His smile was small but genuine, the kind of smile that reached his eyes. Tomorrow. Tomorrow. Tomorrow turned into the day after, which turned into a week, which turned into 3 months of the kind of slow-burning romance that Nia had only ever written about, never experienced. Joon-ha was patient, careful, attentive in ways that made her chest ache, because she wasn't used to being handled like she was precious rather than fragile. They went to art galleries in Samcheongdong, where he stood behind her and murmured observations about the paintings that made her see them differently. They ate street food in Myeongdong, sitting on plastic stools and laughing at how underdressed he looked in his designer clothes. They walked through Namsan Tower at night, and he pointed out constellations she'd never noticed before, his voice soft in the darkness. And every date, every conversation, every moment they spent together, Nia felt herself falling hard and fast and terrifyingly deep for a man who looked at her like she was the first real thing he'd seen in years. But there was a tension building too, subtle but persistent, like a string being pulled tighter and tighter. It showed up in the moments when their kisses deepened and his hands moved to her waist, and she pulled back with a laugh that sounded forced. It showed up in the way he'd watch her sometimes, confusion flickering in his eyes, like he was trying to solve a puzzle she wouldn't let him see. She told herself she'd tell him. Soon. When the moment was right. When she could find the words to explain that at 26, she'd never let anyone that close because the one person she'd planned to give that part of herself to had made her feel like it was the only thing about her worth taking. But the right moment never came. And the tension kept building. Nia's best friend Mara noticed first. They were sitting in Nia's apartment one evening, boxes of fried chicken between them, soju shots lined up on the coffee table. So when are you going to tell him? Mara asked, reaching for another piece of chicken. Tell him what? Mara gave her a look. Don't play dumb. You know what? Nia took a shot instead of answering. The burn of the alcohol giving her an excuse for the tears that suddenly stung her eyes. I don't know how. You open your mouth and you say words. It's really that simple. It's not simple. You don't understand. I understand that you're falling in love with this guy, and you're lying to him about something pretty significant. That's what I understand. Nia set down her glass harder than she meant to. I'm not lying. You're not telling the truth. Same thing. Mara's voice softened. Look, I love you. You know I do. But you can't build something real on secrets. And if he's the kind of guy who'd judge you for this, then he's not worth your time anyway. What if he leaves? What if he doesn't? The question hung in the air between them, heavy with possibility. Nia wanted to believe it. Wanted to believe that Joon-ha would understand, would be patient, would see her as more than just this one thing. But Evan had made promises too. Evan had said he understood. And then he'd made her feel like she was withholding something from him. Like her fear was a personal insult. Like her body was a prize he'd earned the right to claim. "I'll tell him," Nia said finally. "Soon." But soon became another week, and another, and the tension kept building until it felt like something was going to break. Meanwhile, Joon-ha was having his own crisis. He sat in his sister Yeren's apartment, a glass of whiskey in his hand, trying to explain something he didn't fully understand himself. "She pulls away every time," he said, staring at the amber liquid. "Every single time things start to get physical, she finds a reason to stop. A joke, a distraction, something." Yeren, who was sprawled on her couch with her laptop, didn't look up. "So she's not ready. What's the problem?" "The problem is I don't know why. The problem is I'm starting to feel like," he stopped, jaw clenching, "like she doesn't actually want me." Now Yeren did look up, her expression sharp. "Or maybe she does want you and she's scared." "Of what?" "I don't know, Appa. Maybe you should ask her." Joon-ha drained his whiskey. "What if she just doesn't feel the same way? What if I'm imagining this connection?" Yeren closed her laptop with a snap. "Are you really going to do this again? Are you really going to assume the worst about someone who's giving you every other sign that she cares about you? Because that's what you do. You assume people only want you for the hotel chain, for the money, for the status. You never consider that maybe they just like you." "That's not." "It is. It's exactly what you're doing. This girl writes romance novels about gentle love, spends every free moment with you, looks at you like you hung the moon, but God forbid she's not ready to jump into bed after 3 months. Must mean she's using you, right? Must mean you're not good enough." The words hit harder than Joon-ha expected. Because Yeren was right. He was doing it again. Letting old wounds dictate new stories. Letting the ghost of someone who'd hurt him 10 years ago convince him that every hesitation was a rejection. "What if she's just scared?" Yeren said again, gentler this time. "What if she needs to know you're not going anywhere before she can let you in?" Joon-ha's phone buzzed on the table. A text from Nia, "Miss you. Tomorrow?" He picked up the phone, thumb hovering over the keyboard. Yeren was right. He needed to talk to her. Really talk. No more dancing around the tension. No more pretending everything was fine when they both knew something was building between them that needed to be addressed. He typed back, "Can we really talk tomorrow? There's something I need to say." Her response came quickly, "Yes." "My place? 7 p.m.? Perfect." He set down the phone, but the unease in his chest didn't settle. Because he'd spent 10 years building walls around the parts of himself that had been violated, and he wasn't sure he knew how to take them down. He wasn't sure he knew how to explain that when she pulled away, it wasn't just rejection he felt. It was the echo of hands that had taken without asking, of a night that had stolen his ability to trust his own instincts about what people wanted from him. But he had to try. They both did. Nia spent the next day in a state of barely contained panic. "Can we really talk?" felt like code for "we need to talk," which felt like code for "this isn't working." She knew she was catastrophizing, but she couldn't stop. By the time her last class ended, she'd convinced herself that Joon-ha was going to end things, that she'd waited too long, that her fear had finally pushed him away, unless she didn't give him the chance. The thought came to her as she was walking through the department store near her apartment, passing the lingerie section on her way to buy wine for dinner. She stopped, staring at the displays of lace and silk, and something desperate and reckless unfurled in her chest. What if you just did it? What if you stopped being afraid and showed him you want this? Before she could talk herself out of it, she was inside the store, picking out black lace that made her feel confident and terrified in equal measure. She bought candles at the home goods store downstairs. A bottle of wine that was probably too expensive. Everything she thought she needed to stage a scene of confidence, of readiness, of being the kind of woman who knew what she wanted. Back at her apartment, she transformed her bedroom into something that looked like it belonged in one of her novels. Soft lighting, music playing low, everything arranged just so. She changed into the lingerie and stared at herself in the mirror, practicing confidence, practicing the smile she'd wear when he arrived, practicing the words she'd say to make this seem natural instead of staged. But underneath the practiced confidence, her heart was hammering, and her hands were shaking, and a small voice in the back of her head was screaming that this was wrong. That this wasn't how she wanted it to happen, that she was doing exactly what she'd done with Evan, performing instead of being honest. She ignored the voice, put on more lipstick, poured herself a glass of wine for courage, and when the doorbell rang at 7 exactly, she took a deep breath and opened the door. Joon-ha stood in the hallway, holding a bouquet of white roses, and the look on his face when he saw her was everything she'd hoped for and everything she'd feared. Desire, yes, but also confusion, concern. Like he could sense that something was off but couldn't quite put his finger on what. "Hi," she said, her voice coming out breathier than she intended. "Come in." He stepped inside, and she watched his eyes take in the scene. The candles, the music, the wine glasses waiting on the coffee table. She watched him process it, watched something shift in his expression. "Nia, I wanted tonight to be special," she said quickly, before he could finish whatever he was going to say. Before he could ask questions she didn't want to answer. "I wanted." She moved closer, running her hands up his chest, feeling him tense under her touch. "I wanted to show you how I feel." "Wait." His hands caught hers, gentle but firm. "I thought we were going to talk." "We can talk later." She stood on her toes, kissing him before he could protest, and for a moment he responded, his lips moving against hers with the same warmth, the same care he always showed. But then he pulled back, his brow furrowed. "Something's wrong." "Nothing's wrong. She kissed him again, harder this time, trying to silence the questions, trying to push past the fear by sheer force of will. "I want this. I want you." She guided him toward the bedroom, and he followed, but she could feel his hesitation, could feel him trying to understand what was happening. The bedroom door closed behind them, and suddenly it was real. Suddenly there was no more room for pretending, and Nia felt panic rising in her throat like bile. But she'd come this far. She couldn't stop now. Couldn't admit that this was all wrong, that she wasn't ready, that she was terrified. She kissed him again, pushed him toward the bed, started unbuttoning his shirt with hands that trembled despite her efforts to steady them. Joon-ha caught her wrists, his eyes searching her face. "Nia, slow down. What's going on?" "Nothing. Her voice cracked. "Please don't ask questions. Please just." But he was asking questions now. She could see it in his eyes, see him starting to piece together what she'd been hiding, what she'd been too afraid to say. And instead of relief, instead of the comfort of finally being honest, Nia felt only shame burning hot in her chest. "It's fine," she said desperately. "I'm fine. I want this." She pushed him down onto the bed, climbed onto his lap, tried to kiss away his doubts and her fears and all the reasons this was a terrible idea. For a moment he kissed her back. For a moment, his hands moved to her waist, pulling her closer, and she thought maybe this would work, maybe she could push through the fear and come out the other side whole. But then his hands were sliding up her back, his touch gentler than she'd expected, more reverent, and something in her broke. The fear she'd been holding back crashed over her like a wave, and suddenly she couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't do anything but freeze completely. Joon-ha felt it immediately. His hands stilled. His whole body tensed. "Nia." His voice was careful, controlled. "Nia, look at me." She couldn't. She was shaking now, trembling all over, and she hated herself for it, hated that she couldn't even do this one thing right. "Hey." His hands moved to her face, tilting her head up so she had to meet his eyes. What she saw there made her want to disappear. Not anger, not frustration, but fear. "What's going on? Talk to me." "I'm okay," she whispered, but her voice betrayed her, breaking on the words. "You're shaking." "I'm okay. A sob escaped before she could stop it. "I just need a minute. I can do this. I want to do this." "Nia." His eyes widened as realization started to dawn. "Have you?" He stopped, his breath catching. "Is this your first time?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy and damning, and Nia felt everything crumbling. All her careful planning, all her staged confidence, all her desperate attempts to be someone she wasn't. "Yes," she whispered. The word landed like a bomb. Joon-ha went completely still, his hands dropping from her face like she'd burned him. The look that crossed his expression was pure horror. Not disgust, not judgment, but something worse. Something that looked like he was seeing himself through a lens she didn't understand. "Oh God." His voice was barely audible. Oh God, I almost. No, it's okay. I wanted. It's not okay. He was pulling away now, putting distance between them, his hands shaking as badly as hers. Nia, you were terrified. You were pretending to be okay. I could have. He stopped, running his hands through his hair, his breathing ragged. I could have hurt you. You didn't. You wouldn't. You don't know that. The words came out harsh, anguished. You don't know what he stopped again, and she saw something in his eyes she'd never seen before. Something dark and wounded and ancient. This isn't something you survive. It's something you choose. And you weren't choosing this. Not really. Nia reached for him, but he flinched back, and the movement broke something in her chest. Joon-ha, please. I can't. He was backing toward the door now, grabbing his shirt, his hands fumbling with the buttons. I can't do this. Not like this. Not when. His voice cracked. Why didn't you tell me? I was scared. Of what? Of me. Of you leaving. The words tore out of her, raw and honest and too late. I was scared that if you knew, you'd think I was broken. You'd think I was too much work. You'd. So you lied. I didn't lie. You staged a whole scene to manipulate me into sleeping with you without telling me it was your first time. That's lying, Nia. He stopped, his face crumbling. That's not fair. To either of us. The bathroom door slammed between them, and through it, she heard him trying to compose himself, heard the sound of water running, heard him take shaking breaths that told her he was crying. She stood frozen in her bedroom, surrounded by candles and scattered lingerie and the ruins of her plan, and realized she'd done exactly what she'd accused Evan of doing. She'd treated her body like a transaction, like something to trade for love, for acceptance, for the right to be chosen. When Joon-ha finally emerged from the bathroom, his face was pale but composed. He wouldn't look at her directly. I'm leaving, he said quietly. Joon-ha. I need to think. He finally looked at her, and the pain in his eyes made her want to break. I can't be the person who takes something from you that you're not ready to give. I won't be that person. Not again. The last two words caught her attention, opened up a question she suddenly realized she should have asked months ago. But before she could say anything, he was gone, the door closing with a soft click that felt louder than any slam. Nia sank to the bathroom floor, her carefully constructed scene falling apart around her, and let herself cry. Not the quiet, restrained tears she'd learned to cry in church, but ugly, gasping sobs that shook her whole body. Because she'd ruined it. She'd ruined the best thing that had happened to her in years by being too afraid to be honest, by trying to skip past the vulnerable parts and go straight to the ending. Her phone buzzed on the tile beside her. A missed call from a blocked number. Then a text from Mara. How did the talk go? Nia stared at the message and couldn't bring herself to respond, because there were no words for what had just happened. No way to explain that she'd finally found someone who made her feel safe, and she destroyed it by pretending to be brave instead of actually being honest. The rain started again outside, tapping against the windows like it was trying to offer sympathy. Nia pulled her knees to her chest and stared at her reflection in the dark screen of her phone, seeing herself clearly for the first time in months. Who are you? She thought. Who are you when you're not performing? She didn't know. And that was the problem. 3 days passed in a fog. Nia called in sick to work, which she'd never done before. She ignored Mara's increasingly concerned texts. She sat in her apartment surrounded by her manuscript pages and tried to write, but every word felt like a lie. How could she write about gentle love when she didn't even know how to be gentle with herself? On the 4th day, she forced herself to leave the apartment. Not because she felt better, but because she couldn't stand her own company anymore. She walked to the cafe where she'd first had coffee with Joon-ha, ordered the same Americano, sat by the same window. The rain had stopped days ago, but the sky was still gray, still heavy with the promise of more to come. She pulled out her manuscript, the pages she'd managed to save from that first rainstorm, and started reading from the beginning. The story she'd been trying to tell was about a woman who'd been hurt learning to trust a man who'd been betrayed. It was about two broken people finding wholeness in each other. But Nia realized now that she'd been writing a fantasy. Because wholeness didn't come from another person. It came from finally being honest about the parts of yourself you'd been hiding. Even from yourself. Especially from yourself. Her phone buzzed. A text from Joon-ha. Can we talk? Same place. 30 minutes? Her heart jumped into her throat. She wanted to say yes immediately, but she forced herself to wait. To think about what she actually wanted to say. Not what would make him stay. Not what would fix things. But what was actually true. After a long moment, she typed back, yes. 29 minutes later, the cafe door opened, and Joon-ha walked in. He looked like he hadn't slept, dark circles under his eyes. His usually immaculate appearance slightly disheveled. But his eyes, when they met hers, were clear. Determined. He sat down across from her without ordering anything, his hands flat on the table between them. I need to tell you something, he said. And I need you to listen without interrupting. Can you do that? Nia nodded, her throat too tight for words. Joon-ha took a deep breath. When I was 20, I was assaulted. By someone I trusted. Someone I thought cared about me. His voice was steady, but she could see the effort it took to keep it that way. I was drunk. I said yes at first, but then I changed my mind, and he stopped, swallowed hard. She didn't stop. And I was too drunk, too confused, too ashamed to make her. Nia's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't speak, didn't interrupt, just reached across the table and placed her hand over his. He didn't pull away this time. For years, I convinced myself it didn't matter. That it wasn't the same as what happens to women. That I should have been stronger. That I'd asked for it by getting drunk in the first place. But it did matter. It changed how I saw myself. It made me believe that the only thing people wanted from me was my body, my status, my usefulness. That no one would ever want just me. His eyes met hers, raw with vulnerability. And then I met you. And you saw me. Actually saw me. And it terrified me because I didn't know how to trust it. Didn't know how to believe that you weren't just waiting to take something from me. I'm so sorry, Nia whispered. Let me finish. He squeezed her hand. That night, when I realized you were a virgin, when I realized you'd been terrified and trying to hide it, I panicked. Because for a second, I saw myself becoming the person who'd hurt me. I saw myself as someone who was taking instead of being given to. And I couldn't, his voice broke. I couldn't let that happen. Not to you. Not when I know what that feels like. The tears were streaming down Nia's face now, but she stayed silent, giving him space to finish. I left because I was scared. Not of you, not of your virginity, but of becoming someone I've spent 10 years trying not to be. But I've had 3 days to think about it, and I realized that leaving was just another way of running. Just another way of letting fear make my decisions for me. He took both her hands now, his grip warm and steady. I'm not leaving because you're a virgin. I'm not leaving because you were scared. I'm leaving if, and only if, we can't learn to be honest with each other. Really honest. About our fears, about our pasts, about all the ways we're still healing. Nia found her voice, small but steady. I need to tell you something too. Joon-ha nodded, waiting. I was engaged before I came to Korea. To a man named Evan who made me feel like my virginity was the only valuable thing about me. Like I was holding on to something precious, but also like I was withholding something he deserved. He never forced me, never pushed too hard, but he made me feel guilty for being afraid. Made me feel like I was broken for not being ready after 2 years together. She took a shaky breath, the words coming easier now that she'd started. When I finally broke off the engagement, he looked relieved. Like I'd been a burden he was glad to set down. And I realized that he never wanted me. He wanted the idea of me, the pure, virginal church girl who would eventually give him what he'd waited for. But he didn't want the messy, complicated, scared human being underneath. Joon-ha's grip on her hands tightened, grounding her. So I came to Korea to start over. To write a novel about the kind of love I wanted to believe in. But I couldn't finish it because I didn't know what that looked like. And then I met you, and for the first time, I thought maybe I'd found it. Someone who saw me as more than just this one thing. Someone who made me feel like I could be whole without having to prove anything. Her voice cracked. But then I got scared. Scared that you'd eventually want what Evan wanted. Scared that I'd disappoint you. Scared that my fear itself was the problem. not the people I kept giving my fear to. So I tried to skip past it. Tried to just be brave instead of being honest. And I hurt us both. Why didn't you tell me? Joon-ha asked softly. Before that night, I mean. Why didn't you just say you'd never done this before? Because every time I tried to find the words, I heard Evan's voice in my head telling me I was making a big deal out of nothing. Or my church telling me that virginity was my only currency, but also that wanting to keep it made me a prude. I didn't know how to talk about it without making it sound like either a prize I was withholding or a burden I was carrying. I didn't know how to just say, this is where I am and I need time, without it sounding like a judgment on you or on us. It wouldn't have been, Joon-ha said firmly. If you'd told me, I would have waited. I would have been patient. I would have. He stopped, his jaw clenching. I would have made sure you felt safe, not scared. I know that now. I should have known it then. Nia wiped at her tears with her free hand. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for lying. For staging that whole thing. For making you feel like you'd done something wrong when you hadn't. When you've been nothing but patient and kind, Anne. Her voice broke completely. And exactly what I needed, if I'd just been brave enough to be honest. They sat in silence for a moment, the cafe humming around them, other people's conversations washing over them like background noise. Outside, the gray sky was finally starting to break, thin streams of sunlight pushing through the clouds. Where do we go from here? Nia asked finally, her voice small. Joon-ha was quiet for a long moment, his thumbs tracing circles on the backs of her hands. I don't know, he said honestly. I want to say we go back to how things were, but I don't think we can. Not exactly. Too much has been said. Too much has been revealed. Nia's heart sank, but he kept talking. But maybe that's not a bad thing. Maybe we needed to break a little to understand what we're actually building. Because I don't want a relationship where we're both performing for each other, both hiding the parts we think are too damaged to show. I want, he looked at her, his eyes fierce with intention. I want the messy truth. The scared parts and the hurt parts and all the ways we're still figuring out how to be gentle with ourselves. I want that too, Nia whispered. Then we start over. Not from the beginning, but from here. From honesty. Okay. She took a shaky breath. Honest truth, I'm terrified right now. Terrified that I've ruined this. Terrified that you'll eventually realize I'm too much work. Terrified that I'll never be able to get past my own fear. Honest truth, Joon-ha echoed. I'm terrified too. Terrified that I'll mess this up. Terrified that my past will keep me from being present with you. Terrified that I'll always be waiting for the other shoe to drop, for you to want something from me that I can't give. What do we do with all that fear? We tell each other. Every time. No more hiding, no more performing. We tell each other when we're scared, and we figure it out together. Nia nodded, a small smile breaking through the tears. That sounds exhausting. Probably, Joon-ha agreed, and for the first time in days, she saw him smile too. But it sounds honest. And I think I'd rather be exhausted and honest than comfortable and lying. Me too. They sat there for another moment, hands clasped across the table, both of them visibly shaken but also visibly committed to staying, to trying, to choosing the hard, honest path over the easy, performative one. Can I ask you something? Nia said quietly. Anything. That night when you left, you said not again. What did you mean? Joon-ha's expression shifted, something old and painful surfacing. I meant that I've been on both sides of this. I know what it's like to have someone take from you when you're not ready. But I also know what it's like to almost take from someone else because you didn't. No, they weren't ready. After what happened to me, I was reckless for a while, trying to prove to myself that I was still in control, that I could still choose. And there was this one night. He stopped, swallowing hard. There was this one night with someone who seemed into it, who said yes, but who I realized afterwards had only said yes because she felt pressured. She wasn't ready and I didn't see it, and I've carried that guilt ever since. That's not the same as what happened to you, Nia said firmly. You didn't force her. You stopped when you realized. But I should have seen it sooner. I should have asked more questions, should have been more careful. And that night with you, I saw the same signs I'd missed then. The trembling, the forced confidence, the fear underneath. And I panicked because I couldn't become that person again. I couldn't be someone who took without making sure it was really being given. Nia's heart ached for him, for the weight he'd been carrying, for the way their fears had collided in the worst possible way. You're not that person. You've never been that person. You stopped. You asked questions. You cared about my consent even when I was lying about being okay. I should have asked sooner. And I should have told you sooner. We both made mistakes. But neither of us is the villain here. She squeezed his hands. The villain is the fear. The shame. The lies we tell ourselves about what we're supposed to be instead of accepting who we are. Joon-ha looked at her for a long moment, and she saw something shift in his expression. Something softening, something like hope beginning to take root. You're right, he said quietly. You're right. So what now? Now we take it slow. Really slow. We talk about everything. Boundaries, fears, what we need, what we're not ready for. We stop assuming we know what the other person wants and we start asking. And if it's hard, then it's hard. But we do it anyway. Nia felt something loosening in her chest, something that had been wound tight for years finally beginning to unravel. It wasn't relief exactly, and it wasn't happiness. It was something more complex, more real. It was the feeling of being seen completely and not being rejected, of being honest about her brokenness, and having someone choose to stay anyway. I want to keep seeing you, she said. If you want that too. I do. But I need you to promise me something. What? Promise me that if you're ever scared, ever unsure, ever not ready for something, you'll tell me. Even if you think it'll disappoint me. Even if you think it'll make me leave. Promise me you'll choose honesty over performance, every single time. I promise, Nia said and meant it. And I need you to promise me something too. What? Promise me that when your past tries to convince you that I only want something from you, you'll tell me. Promise me you'll let me prove that I see you, not just what you can give me. I promise. They sealed it with a squeeze of hands, and then Joon-ha stood up. Come on, let's get out of here. Where are we going? I don't know. Somewhere we can just be. No pressure, no expectations. Just two people who are trying to figure out how to be gentle with each other. They walked out of the cafe into the breaking sunlight, and for the first time in days, Nia felt like she could breathe. The story wasn't over, not by a long shot. There would be more hard conversations, more moments of fear, more times when their pasts tried to dictate their future. But they'd survive them. Together. Honestly. Over the next few weeks, they rebuilt slowly. Coffee dates that ended with just coffee. Walks through the city where they talked about everything. Childhoods, fears, dreams, the ways they'd learned to hide their hurt from the world. Movie nights in Nia's apartment where they sat on opposite ends of the couch until one of them couldn't stand the distance anymore and closed the gap. But only for cuddling. Only for the comfort of being held. Joon-ha told her about his family's expectations. About growing up as a business asset rather than a son. About the pressure to be perfect that had made him feel like any vulnerability was weakness. Nia told him about her grandmother, about the church that had taught her that her body was sacred but also dangerous, about Evan and all the ways he'd made her feel like love was something she had to earn. And slowly, carefully, they started to trust each other with the truth. One evening, about a month after their conversation at the cafe, they were lying on Nia's couch, her head on his chest, his fingers running through her hair. The TV played something neither of them was watching. Can I ask you something? Nia said quietly. Always. Do you think we would have worked if we'd met at a different time? If we'd both been less broken? No, they weren't ready. After what happened to me, I was reckless for a while, trying to prove to myself that I was still in control, that I could still choose. And there was this one night, he stopped, swallowing hard. There was this one night with someone who seemed into it, who said yes, but who I realized afterwards had only said yes because she felt pressured. She wasn't ready and I didn't see it, and I've carried that guilt ever since. That's not the same as what happened to you, Nia said firmly. You didn't force her. You stopped when you realized. But I should have seen it sooner. I should have asked more questions, should have been more careful. And that night with you, I saw the same signs I'd missed then. The trembling, the forced confidence, the fear underneath. And I panicked because I couldn't become that person again. I couldn't be someone who took without making sure it was really being given. Nia's heart ached for him, for the weight he'd been carrying, for the way their fears had collided in the worst possible way. You're not that person. You've never been that person. You stopped. You asked questions. You cared about my consent even when I was lying about being okay. I should have asked sooner. And I should have told you sooner. We both made mistakes. But neither of us is the villain here. She squeezed his hands. The villain is the fear, the shame, the lies we tell ourselves about what we're supposed to be instead of accepting who we are. Joon-ha looked at her for a long moment, and she saw something shift in his expression. Something softening, something like hope beginning to take root. You're right, he said quietly. You're right. So what now? Now we take it slow. Really slow. We talk about everything, boundaries, fears, what we need, what we're not ready for. We stop assuming we know what the other person wants, and we start asking. And if it's hard, then it's hard. But we do it anyway. Nia felt something loosening in her chest, something that had been wound tight for years finally beginning to unravel. It wasn't relief exactly, and it wasn't happiness. It was something more complex, more real. It was the feeling of being seen completely and not being rejected, of being honest about her brokenness, and having someone choose to stay anyway. I want to keep seeing you, she said. If you want that too. I do. But I need you to promise me something. What? Promise me that if you're ever scared, ever unsure, ever not ready for something, you'll tell me. Even if you think it'll disappoint me. Even if you think it'll make me leave. Promise me you'll choose honesty over performance, every single time. I promise, Nia said and meant it. And I need you to promise me something too. What? Promise me that when your past tries to convince you that I only want something from you, you'll tell me. Promise me you'll let me prove that I see you, not just what you can give me. I promise. They sealed it with a squeeze of hands, and then Joon-ha stood up. Come on. Let's get out of here. Where are we going? I don't know. Somewhere we can just be. No pressure, no expectations. Just two people who are trying to figure out how to be gentle with each other. They walked out of the cafe into the breaking sunlight, and for the first time in days, Nia felt like she could breathe. The story wasn't over, not by a long shot. There would be more hard conversations, more moments of fear, more times when their pasts tried to dictate their future. But they'd survive them. Together. Honestly. Over the next few weeks, they rebuilt slowly. Coffee dates that ended with just coffee. Walks through the city where they talked about everything. Childhoods, fears, dreams, the ways they'd learned to hide their hurt from the world. Movie nights in Nia's apartment where they sat on opposite ends of the couch until one of them couldn't stand the distance anymore and closed the gap. But only for cuddling, only for the comfort of being held. Joon-ha told her about his family's expectations, about growing up as a business asset rather than a son, about the pressure to be perfect that had made him feel like any vulnerability was weakness. Nia told him about her grandmother, about the church that had taught her that her body was sacred but also dangerous, about Evan and all the ways he'd made her feel like love was something she had to earn. And slowly, carefully, they started to trust each other with the truth. One evening, about a month after their conversation at the cafe, they were lying on Nia's couch, her head on his chest, his fingers running through her hair. The TV played something neither of them was watching. Can I ask you something? Nia said quietly. Always. Do you think we would have worked if we'd met at a different time? If we'd both been less broken? Joon-ha was quiet for a moment, considering. I don't know. Maybe. But I think we might have missed each other. I think the broken parts are what helped us recognize each other in the first place. You think we're drawn to each other because of our damage? No. I think we're drawn to each other despite our damage. But I think our damage helps us understand each other in ways that people who haven't been hurt can't. It makes us more patient, more careful, more willing to do the work. Nia tilted her head to look at him. Do you ever wish I was easier? Do you ever wish I was simpler? No. Then there's your answer. She smiled, settling back against his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. It was moments like this, quiet, unhurried, free from the pressure to be anything other than what they were. That made her believe they might actually make it. But she also knew it wouldn't always be this easy. Healing wasn't linear. Trust wasn't permanent. It was something that had to be rebuilt every day, in small moments of honesty and vulnerability. I'm working on the ending, she said suddenly. Of your novel? Yeah. I think I finally know how it ends. How? It doesn't end with them getting married or having perfect sex or solving all their problems. It ends with them sitting on a couch, scared and hopeful and honest, and choosing to keep trying. Joon-ha pressed a kiss to the top of her head. Sounds like a good ending to me. It's not really an ending though, is it? It's more like a beginning. Maybe that's the point. Maybe the best love stories don't end. They just keep beginning over and over, every time you choose each other again. Nia closed her eyes, letting his words wash over her, letting herself believe that maybe, just maybe, this was what gentle love looked like. Not the absence of fear or pain or complication, but the presence of someone who saw all of it and stayed anyway, who chose honesty over comfort, who was willing to do the hard work of being present, being patient, being real. They stayed like that for a long time, wrapped up in each other, wrapped up in the possibility of what they were building. And when Joon-ha eventually had to leave for a family dinner, the goodbye was sweet and simple. A kiss at the door, a promise to text when he got home, a warmth that lingered long after he'd gone. Nia walked back to her couch and picked up her manuscript. She sat down with a pen and started writing the ending she'd been searching for all along. The night they almost loved wasn't the night that destroyed them. It was the night that saved them. Because it forced them to stop running from their own stories and start writing new ones together. Messy, complicated, honest ones. The kind of stories that didn't end with happily ever after, but with we're still trying, and that's enough. She set down her pen and smiled, because for the first time in her life she believed it. That trying was enough. That being honest was enough. That she was enough, exactly as she was, scared and scarred and still learning how to be gentle with herself. The rain started again outside, soft and steady, but this time it didn't feel like drowning. It felt like washing clean. Like starting over. Like the beginning of something real. 3 months later, Nia stood in front of her students at the International Academy, holding up a copy of a published romance novel. Not hers. Not yet. But one she'd recently read that had made her cry. What makes a good love story? She asked the class. Hands went up, and she called on a student in the front row. A happy ending, the girl said confidently. Maybe, Nia said. But what if the happy ending isn't about everything being perfect? What if it's about two people choosing to be honest with each other, even when it's hard? The students looked at her with varying degrees of interest and confusion. She smiled. Here's what I've learned about love stories, she said, leaning against her desk. The best ones aren't about perfect people finding perfect love. They're about broken people finding someone who makes them want to stop performing and start being real. They're about learning that vulnerability isn't weakness. It's the only way to build something that lasts. After class, she checked her phone. A text from Joon-ha. Dinner tonight? I want to talk about something. Her heart jumped. But this time it wasn't with fear. It was with anticipation. With trust. With the knowledge that whatever he wanted to talk about, they'd figure it out together. She texted back. Your place or mine? Mine. I'll cook. You're going to burn something. Probably. But you love me anyway. Nia stared at the message. At those 3 words he'd slipped in so casually. They hadn't said them yet. Not out loud, not officially. But they'd been showing it in 1,000 small ways. In patience. In honesty. In choosing each other, over and over again. She typed back, yeah, I do. 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. Finally, good. Because I love you too. And I wanted to say it in person, but I couldn't wait. Nia felt tears pricking at her eyes, but this time they were happy tears. Grateful tears. The kind of tears that came from finally believing that she deserved this. That they both did. She typed, see you tonight. Then she grabbed her bag, walked out of the academy into the bright afternoon sun, and headed home to finish her novel. Because she finally knew how it ended. Not with a wedding or a perfectly choreographed love scene, but with 2 people standing in a kitchen, burning dinner, laughing at their own imperfections, and choosing each other anyway, with honesty, with patience, with the kind of gentle love that wasn't afraid of broken things. Because broken things, when held carefully, could still be beautiful. If this story touched something in you, if you've ever felt like your past was holding you back from your future, you're not alone. Healing isn't about becoming perfect. It's about becoming honest. It's about finding someone who sees your scars and doesn't run, who holds your fear with gentle hands and says, "We'll figure this out together." Hit that like button if this story made you feel something real. Subscribe if you want more stories about the messy, complicated, beautiful truth of what love actually looks like. And drop a comment telling me, do you think Nia and Joon-ha will make it? Do you think love is enough when two broken people find each other? Because I want to know what you think. I want to know if this story reminded you that you're not too broken to be loved, that your fear doesn't make you unworthy, that the right person won't ask you to perform, they'll ask you to be honest. Thanks for staying till the end. See you in the next story.